At my graduation, the stadium buzzed with cheers, camera shutters, and families calling out names. I should have felt proud, relieved something, but my phone vibrated and everything inside me dropped. At graduation, Dad texted, "Don't expect help. You're on your own." The words cut sharper than they should have. After 6 years of nonstop research, late-night coding, and living off grit and caffeine, this was what I got. While the dean called out names, I sat frozen in my gown, pretending nothing was wrong. But that wasn't the message that changed everything. My name is Chloe Hart, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the daughter who overthinks everything. At least that's what my dad likes to say. Growing up in a small California town, ambition wasn't something people admired. It was something they warned you about, like a storm you shouldn't walk into. I was the kid who preferred books over pep rallies, coding problems over sleepovers, research papers over gossip. To my parents, that meant I was drifting toward a life with no real stability. They never understood what I did. When I tried explaining neural networks over Thanksgiving dinner, Dad laughed and told me to stop talking like a robot. Mom waved me off, saying I should focus on finding a job that made sense. Each dismissal felt small at the time, but they stacked on top of one another enough weight to convince me that sharing my world with them was pointless. Still, I worked hard. I paid my own way through most of college. I picked up assistantships, graded hundreds of assignments, taught intro labs, took on freelance programming gigs at night. I lived quietly, choosing discipline over comfort, grinding through a field that demanded everything. And even when I started building something bigger, something real, I kept it close private. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I'd learned long ago they weren't listening. Graduation day was supposed to be different. I watched other families cheering, holding signs, crying when their kids walked the stage. Moms fixing tassels, dads yelling names with voices cracking from pride. I tried not to stare, tried not to feel that familiar pinch in my chest. Jessica nudged me gently. "You okay? You look somewhere else." I forced a smile, just tired. But the truth was, Dad's message had lodged itself right under my ribs. "You're on your own." The timing wasn't an accident. It never was with him. He believed life was a series of teachable moments, and apparently even my PhD graduation was just another opportunity to remind me I wasn't enough. I sat there, surrounded by a sea of red gowns, pretending to blend in, pretending it didn't hurt, and pretending the life they thought I lived was the only one I had. The moment the ceremony shifted was so small, so ordinary, it almost felt unreal. My phone buzzed again, quiet, barely noticeable beneath the roar of families cheering each graduate's name. I assumed it was Jessica sending me a meme to lighten the mood. Instead, I saw a name that didn't belong in a stadium full of folding chairs and graduation brochures. David, my CFO. My stomach tightened. He knew where I was. He wouldn't call unless something was breaking news. I glanced at the stage 2 rows before my turn and answered in the smallest whisper. "Hey, I'm literally in the middle of Chloe." He cut in, breathless. "I'm so sorry, but I had to tell you. The IPO went live 20 minutes ago. We priced high." And he exhaled, almost laughing. "The IPO hit 6 billion. 6 billion. It didn't register at first. It was like hearing someone else's fortune." Then heat flushed up my neck. I could feel people turning, not because they knew what was happening, but because David's voice, excited and bright, carried farther than it should have. Behind me, someone whispered, "Did he say billion?" Jessica's head snapped toward me. "Chloe, what was that?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My heart was pounding too loudly. David kept talking, unaware of the crowd that was slowly tilting toward me like a field of sunflowers. "We're trending on every financial site. Investors are pouring in. Chloe, we did it. The word hit harder than the numbers. For years, I'd hidden the company behind long nights, research meetings, silent work. And now, in the middle of the one place my parents believed I didn't belong, my secret life had burst into the open. I whispered, "David, people can hear you," but it was too late. His final line cut through the ceremony like a strike of lightning. "Everyone's calling you the youngest tech billionaire in the country." That was the moment everything around us shifted. Conversations stopped. A few parents actually stood up to look. I heard at least 3 phones start recording. The air felt electric, humming with disbelief. Then Jessica grabbed my arm. "Everyone heard," she whispered. "Everyone." And that was when I saw them, my parents, pushing through the rows, their expressions sharp, ready to lecture, to scold, completely unaware of the storm they were walking into. If Dad's text had cut me earlier, what was coming next would slice through everything he thought he understood about me. They were still 20 feet away when my phone buzzed again, louder this time, as if the universe had decided subtlety was overrated. I didn't want to answer, not with half the stadium already staring at me, but the name flashing across the screen wasn't one I could ignore. Maria, our head of PR. I brought the phone to my ear, turning slightly so my parents wouldn't see the panic rising in my face. "Maria now really isn't Chloe. I know you're at graduation, but listen," she said, her voice clipped and urgent. "Every major outlet is requesting interviews. Business Daily wants a sit-down tonight. We've already been contacted by morning shows. Your name is everywhere." My breath hitched. "Maria, keep your voice down," but she didn't. "They're calling your valuation unbelievable. 6 billion and climbing. This is historic." A ripple of gasps moved through the rows around me. Jessica pressed a hand over her mouth. "Chloe!" They heard her too. Mom and Dad were close enough now that I could see the lines tightening around Dad's eyes, that familiar storm-brewing expression he wore when he was gearing up to set me straight. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to disappear. Maria continued, her voice spilling into the open air like a confession dropped in church. "You're going to need to approve statements. Your inbox is exploding. Multiple universities want partnerships. This is huge, Chloe." I closed my eyes for a moment, not to block the noise, but to process how fast my 2 lives were colliding. The private world I'd built in silence, brick by careful brick, was no longer private. My parents, the last people I wanted hearing any of this out loud, were now stepping directly into the fallout. I forced a thin whisper. "Maria, I'll call you back." But when I lowered the phone, people were still staring. Phones still pointed. Some were even smiling, excited to witness a story they'd probably repeat for years. I was there when... And my parents. They stood barely 2 feet away now. Mom looked thrown off balance, scanning the faces around us. Dad's expression was harder, confused, irritated, trying to piece together what he'd just walked into. "Chloe," he said sharply, "what on earth is going on? Why are people looking at you like that?" For the first time, I didn't shrink under the weight of his voice, because for the first time, he wasn't the one holding the narrative. Dad's voice sliced through the noise, sharp and impatient. "Chloe, answer me." "What is happening?" Dozens of eyes flicked between us, waiting. The stadium around us buzzed with a strange mix of excitement and confusion, like people sensing a storm but not knowing where the lightning would hit. I stood slowly smoothing the front of my gown, trying to steady the tremor beneath my ribs. "Maybe we should talk later," I said quietly. Dad scoffed. "No. We'll talk now." His voice rose enough that a few people turned again. "You storm off to get a PhD no one asked for and expect us to applaud. And now you're causing a scene at your own graduation." Jessica inhaled sharply beside me. Mom shifted uncomfortably but didn't intervene. It was always like this. Dad spoke. Mom fell in line, and I learned to swallow my explanations whole. Not today. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again, loud, insistent. I almost ignored it, but the screen lit up with Maria's name again. Dad noticed. "Who keeps calling you?" he barked. "Is that another one of your little campus jobs, Chloe? You can't avoid real responsibility forever." A laugh, small, bitter, escaped my chest before I could stop it. "Dad, that's not who's calling." He frowned. Then who I didn't answer with words. I answered by hitting speakerphone. Maria's voice burst out bright and unmistakably energized. "Chloe, the valuation just jumped. We're past 6.2 billion. Investors are pushing the projection even higher. Also, you need to prepare for the press. They've already named you one of the youngest self-made tech billionaires in the country." Silence. Silence so heavy it pressed against my skin. Maria kept going, unaware she'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of the graduation ceremony. Board members are thrilled. Multiple agencies reached out about contracts. And the foundation wants confirmation that your donation will still be announced this month, Maria. My voice shook. You're on speaker. A beat. Then, oh God. Okay. Well, hi, someone in the crowd actually laughed. Dad's face drained of color. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Mom clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. I ended the call, lowering the phone. The air around us vibrated with whispers. Did she say billionaire? How old is she? That's her dad. Dad swallowed hard voice, suddenly thin. Chloe, what? What was that? There it was, the question he'd never asked me in years. Not, why aren't you normal or when will you get a real job? But the simplest one, what do you actually do? I looked at him, really looked at him. You texted me this morning telling me I'm on my own, that I shouldn't expect help. I held his gaze. Dad, I haven't needed your help for a long time. His brow furrowed confusion, battling with pride and something like fear. I don't understand. I know, I said softly, because every time I tried to tell you about my work, you shut me down. You thought I was wasting my life. You never listened long enough to see what I was building. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. Chloe, sweetheart, we didn't know. I know you didn't, I replied, because you never asked. A wave of murmurs moved through the crowd. Dad shifted, visibly uncomfortable under strangers' eyes. I reached into my bag and pulled up several entries on my banking app, the anonymous payments, the help with bills, the support I'd quietly sent home over the last 4 years. I turned the screen toward them. These were me, I said. All of them. Mom covered her mouth. Dad leaned in, squinting. You paid these? Yes. But why didn't you tell us? Because you always told me I couldn't take care of myself? I said. So I figured you'd never believe I could take care of anyone else. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad stared at the phone as if it were a detonator. And one more thing, I added, feeling a steadiness rise through me. I did get a real job. I built one. The press arrived, then cameras, microphones, people shouting my name. The security team stepped in to control the crowd. Dad flinched as flash after flash went off. A reporter stepped forward. Chloe Hart, can you confirm the IPO numbers? Are you officially a billionaire? Dad turned toward me slowly, expression collapsing. There it was, the moment the thumbnail had promised. Dad's face when he realized his helpless daughter just became a billionaire. I inhaled deeply. I didn't want revenge that humiliated him. I wanted truth. So I spoke clearly, without anger, without triumph. Yes, I said. The company I founded reached a valuation of over $6 billion today. And yes, that means I'm independently stable and have been for years. A collective gasp rolled across the graduates nearby. The reporter pressed forward. And your parents? How do they feel about your success? I could have said anything. I could have thrown them under the bus. But revenge isn't violence, it's clarity. They're here today, I said. And we're all still processing. But I know they care. And I know they'll understand my work one day. Mom started crying quietly. Dad's throat bobbed as he fought for words. Chloe, he whispered. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, I replied. We'll talk, privately. He nodded slowly, the weight of every assumption he'd ever made settling onto him like a collapsing roof. As security ushered us toward a quieter area, the press still calling after us, I realized something monumental. The power dynamic I'd lived under my entire life, the one where Dad's disappointment defined me, was gone. Not because I'd become a billionaire, but because truth finally had a voice louder than his judgment. Security guided us to a shaded corner near the stadium entrance, far from cameras, far from the crowd still buzzing with the headline they'd just witnessed. The quiet felt strange, almost hollow after the storm of attention. Dad sat down first, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was praying. Mom stood beside him, eyes red mascara smudging at the edges. For the first time in years, neither of them looked like they were preparing a lecture. Chloe, Dad finally said, voice rough. I owe you an apology. A real one. He lifted his head, meeting my eyes with something I'd never seen on him before: uncertainty. I thought I was pushing you toward stability. I didn't realize you'd already built more stability than I ever had. Mom wiped her cheek. We were wrong about your work, about your strength, about everything. Their remorse didn't erase the hurt, but for once I didn't feel invisible. I felt heard fully, finally. I'm not angry, I said quietly, just tired. Tired of being treated like I don't know what I'm doing. I've been standing on my own for years. I just wanted you to see me. Dad swallowed, nodding slowly. We do now. And we're proud of you. Not because of the money, God, not that. Because you didn't give up on yourself even when we didn't understand. The words landed gently, without grand gestures or excuses. No guarantees either, just the beginning of accountability. We walked back toward the ceremony together, still uneasy, still imperfect, but no longer pretending. Something had shifted. Maybe not enough to rewrite our past, but enough to change our future. When I finally stepped back into the sunlight, the ceremony still humming around us, I felt different, not because of the IPO, not because cameras had shouted my name, but because I'd stopped shrinking to fit their expectations. I'd spent years trying to earn a pride they weren't ready to give. Turns out I didn't need their permission to succeed. I only needed the courage to stand as who I really was. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.